What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Alex Cuesta Show. How's everybody doing on this Wednesday, February 8th of 2023? Before we get into all the fun stuff, like, share, follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars, Spotify and iTunes, spread this word of mouth, and go look us up on the socials at the Alex Cuesta Show. David, hi, how are you?
Hi. You never know what goes into every week, me managing my cough at the beginning of the show every time. I try very hard.
Going on quite literally since years now, since we were doing Cuesta Ghost, the other show. I think you just that's like your Lil Wayne thing. If people don't know, like Lil Wayne always had, like, you should just do the cough. Yeah, the lighter. Our signature will be you coughing.
I don't know.
That's how people will know that the show is actually begun. Like, the show can't start until you cough and are extremely unprofessional. Anyway, we're in for some good fun this week. We have a really good show coming up for you. Before we jump into any of that, I want everyone to please go back and listen to last week's show, which we had lots of fun. We had Logan Cook on. He's better known as Carpe Donktum. He is one of the greatest memers of all time. He was one of the biggest players in the Great Meme War of 2016, retweeted by Donald Trump and plenty of people on the right. He's absolutely hilarious and talented. So definitely go listen to that show. It was a really good show. He just got back on Twitter, so he's kind of like getting his bearings with Elon's Twitter. He doesn't know like where he is right now, but it was a great show. This week, we have another fantastic show, and I think, Dave, this is going to be one of our more important shows. This is going to go right up there when we had like Billboard Chris on and certain people that this is very relevant to the culture war and the battle that's going on today, Dave.
I wouldn't even say culture war specifically. I would say just the genuine discussion that needs to be happening around education. I don't think that's culture war wise. I think that's a genuine, like, huge thing that needs to happen.
Something that all people need to be aware of. We're honored to have on Jennifer McWilliams. She's a parental rights consultant. And if people will be familiar with this name, she works very closely with Moms for Liberty. What's going on, Jennifer?
Hi, how's it going? I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Happy to have this discussion.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on because like we both, I think we made it clear that we think this is both really important. This is a topic we've talked about on the show a few times, but it's going to be nice to have someone who's a true expert on about this topic. And the topic is that we're going to start with is something that you have been, railing against, I believe since 2019 is when you really started to do your breakout, is social emotional learning. Now, for people that don't know, if you're not really active in what's going on in your schools, going to school board meetings, this is probably there. Wherever you are, you will probably have something in social emotional learning type of stuff. And they're pretty explicit about it because they know a lot of people don't really know what it is. It sounds all sorts of nice. And, and they'll also couch it with diversity, inclusion, equity, and things like that. But it's a real problem. Now, Jennifer, I want you to kind of go into why should parents of any school-age children or people in general be wary about social emotional learning?
Sure. So social emotional learning, or it's often called SEL, is, you're right, it is in the entire public education system. So just for a reference point, by the year 2016, it was in over 90% of the public education system. At this point, it has fully saturated the system, and it is also now popping up in many private schools, just so your listeners are aware. Mm-hmm. But social emotional learning, it sounds nice. They always use innocuous language that is meant to deceive people, because who does not want their child to be, socially and emotionally competent, right? But it came into the schools under the guise as a mental health initiative, that it was going to come in and help the mental health of our youth. And if you look at what's going on today, it's done quite the opposite of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When they came in and sold this to the schools, they said, this is just it's a program that is going to teach children empathy. It's going to teach them to manage their emotions, and how to build successful relationships. Again, who doesn't want their child to have those skills? And but the problem with social emotional learning is I want people to realize all of those skills are just that. They're skills. They're not necessarily good or bad. It just depends on who's applying them. And for children, whose lens are they being taught through for these skills? And what you will find as you look at this, it's the word that one day, if I never hear again, I'll be fine with. It is through what they call an equity lens. And so when I have a list of words, if I never hear again, I'll be okay with that. But so when you hear equity lens, I want you to think radical activism. I want you to think critical race theory, Marxism. That is the lens that they deliver these skills to the children in education. Now, specifically, SEL comes from a organization called CASEL, that's CASEL, and that stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And they have 5 competencies that they want all children to learn through education. And those are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. Again, more semantics deception.
And one thing real quick for anyone that wants to check that with the CASEL, go on the CASEL website, CASEL.org. They are explicitly out there. What, Jennifer is about to tell you about them is explicitly out there. They're not trying to hide this stuff. So that's one thing about it. If you want to know more about anything that we're saying here, you can go find it. Go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
No, great. Absolutely. So just remember that all of the nice language that they use is through that equity lens. So when social emotional learning came into the schools, it was a systemic change. And so schools all over our country are using specific SEL programs. There are over 100 of these programs. They all use different language, but they all use the competencies from CASEL and take their marching orders from CASEL. So it all works the same, but it's very deceptive for parents to see.
We have a positivity project over here in my school district. It's called the Positivity Project, where they take primary school kids out of their classrooms at least 30 minutes a week and have them go learn about a different culture and really talk about engulfing themselves into it. And it sounds flowery. And it's specifically an SEL project. And so, like you said, like they come in there with this flowery type of language, unless you know exactly what it is.
The school that I worked at, ours was called Leader in Me, and that sounds nice as well. Another huge one in the country is called Second Step, but don't get hooked on the program. Just realize and understand they all work the same. So when they come into the school, they not only have specific SEL lessons that are really focused on emotions. They drive emotions of these children constantly. They want to know how they're feeling, and how are things going at school? How are things at home? How are your friends? And it's just a constant, questioning and engaging of these children to talk about their emotions and focus solely on emotions. And when you're talking about children, that can be very concerning.
And so we're talking 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds. Like, we're not talking high school and middle schoolers here, right, Jennifer? Like, they're included, but a lot of times it's elementary school kids as well.
It is. Actually, it is. It's a K through 12 program. And it is now coming into preschool. So they're pushing it into the preschool. And the systemic change that comes from SEL, there are many tenets to it. So outside of those specific SEL lessons, you have what's called culturally responsive teaching. It changed the way that teachers are trained and supposed to teach children. And culturally responsive teaching, the other CRT, is quite literally to teach the children to have a critical race theory viewpoint, to develop their awareness of the oppression that is in our America, because they believe that it is systemically racist and oppressive. You also have the discipline policies in the school. That also changed. We went from zero tolerance, where kids were not allowed to act out, and there was, not the violence you see today in schools, to restorative justice, restorative practice, which lowers the bar of the standards that they are supposed to behave by and removes consequences. In fact, when they piloted that, it was at the Parkland, Florida high school under Obama, where there was the mass shooting a few years ago. The other thing it did, it changed the way that they counsel the children. And ultimately, it also was a complete culture shift of the school towards this ideology and away from academics.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
I do have a quick question, Jennifer. Now, to me, it seems like a lot is battle over SEL, specifically getting parents and people who are at least acknowledging what's happening at schools to understand what these people are trying to push through and have pushed through. It's a very linguistic battle, as in, like, you tell someone who doesn't know exactly what they mean when they're looking through an equity lens, you say diversity, you say inclusion, you say equity, and they, a normal person who hasn't heard of the way they are saying it, is most likely going to think, like, that's not bad in a sense, like, that's fine, it's just different, like, they're teaching them something that could be useful, when in fact it's very nefarious. Not kind of, it's actually very nefarious, because they're basically speaking a different language and not telling you what they're saying. So my main question is, other than just trying to get the word out as much as possible, what is, like, the best way to try to help people understand and really teach people what they mean in these linguistic kind of Rubik's cubes they're putting together here? Because even if you teach them one word and what they're saying, they might switch up another one. So you kind of got to be able to figure out what's going on the fly. So I know, a long-winded question, but I feel like it's noteworthy.
No, it is. And that you nailed it. Really, that has been the battle for us. Again, I've been fighting this now for 4 years, is to get people to understand the language contamination, because they've redefined all of these words that most good people use and have a general idea of what we mean. If I tell you that I'm teaching my child empathy, I'm teaching my daughter empathy, you have a good sense of what that means. But of course, you don't know my morals, my values, my worldview. And so the way that I teach empathy to my daughter is going to be different than the way you may teach your children.
And most of the time, I won't ask you what you mean by empathy. I would just go with my definition of empathy.
Yeah. And so, but when they teach empathy through this lens, I will give an example so people can understand. When they're teaching empathy to children at school, they are teaching it to I specifically, went through this, but a 6-year-old little girl who's in first grade, when you go into the restroom with a male or to a locker room with a male, you need to have empathy. And I can tell you that is not the lens that I am teaching empathy to my daughter. No. Okay. So whenever you hear all of this language, I think the big point is to understand, if you are not someone that believes America is systemically racist and oppressive and that we need all of these new radical social norms, which is what they're doing, then the language they're using is not likely going to align with your definition. And that is a problem. Our government should not be able to set a standards for the belief system of our children. That is a parent's job. And so, and I tell people this, I have a lot of lovers and a lot of haters. I'm sure you can imagine, but, and they want to, combat me with my beliefs or what I want to teach them. But I truly mean this. I would stand by someone's right, even if it was opposite of mine, to teach their children the way they want to teach them. But we should all stand against the government making this a required mindset that they're pushing.
Certainly. And, and I just want to make people understand that, Jennifer spoke about equity a good amount. And I just want to let people know that they like to confuse and throw this word in. They like to talk about equality and equity right next to each other when they speak. Like David said, they do a lot of linguistic games, and people need to realize that equality and equity live on two different spheres. Equality is everyone has the same opportunity, where equity is everybody gets the same outcome. So if you're looking in your schools and you're going to yourself, oh, why are they getting rid of some gifted and talented programs? Or why are they eliminating some AP, standard AP things and honors? And, we're not celebrating National Honor Society kids anymore. They're just getting the award, but we're not making it open. It's because they're doing this equity thing. They are trying to chop off the head so that everyone can go down to the bottom. It's, they never raise the bottom to the top. They always bring the top to the bottom. So when we're talking about equity, It's not a good thing. They make it sound great. And, and you hear it. And Jennifer, I don't know if you saw today in Congress, there was a hearing in the Education and Workforce Committee. They did it at the same exact time as the Twitter file hearing. So, of course, the Twitter files are going to get all the headlines. And me being the loser I am, I have the C-SPAN app. So, I'm jumping in there and I look, and I was actually going to watch the Twitter file one. And then all of a sudden I see, oh, there's a school one. And me being somebody who is interested in a lot of this stuff and learning about the SEL. And, I listen to new discourses. So I have to say, I listen to James Lindsay a ton. So he has taught me a ton. So I perked up and I'm like, I'm going to pay attention to education one, because while confirming that Joe Biden is a sleazebag is important for our national security, our kids are more important. What they're doing in our schools is more important. And I wish you were up there, because they had Ginny Gentles up there, and she did a great job. She was more focusing on a lot of the queer and gender ideology that they're pushing. And I wish that they would have had you there with her as well to kind of talk about the social emotional learning aspect. Because she got attacked and bullied a few times by the congressman because they typically ask questions that they don't want you to answer and then reclaiming my time. Like that happened a ton just so they can try and get their point out. But it was just interesting because we heard a lot of the people that are necessarily would think that someone like you is just, you're an evil bigot. They use the word constantly, equity, 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 equity. And even the governor of Colorado was there, and he always constantly talked about equity and opportunity and all this stuff. And they're all the buzzwords that you hear. Now, are you someone that's noticing the shift in SEL that's going on, where right now we're dealing with transformative social emotional learning, and that you mentioned culturally responsive? Are you seeing that they're trying to get into more of the cultural responsive realm and away from the transformative realm?
So this is something that I've been explaining to people for a long time. Social emotional learning was always transformative. And I know there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of scholars and people that argue that it was good before transformative SEL. But really transformative SEL, when they came out with that documentation, was just kind of the rebranding of what we already had. Yeah. And I know that's not a common narrative, but that is true. I've done more research than I would admit probably at this point, but it's always been this. It was always going to be this. And as well as culture responsive teaching was always part of it, but they kind of play with the language and go back and forth to see what works for the time. Yeah. But it's always been transformative. And I totally agree with you. I explained to people the only way to have an equitable education is to bring everyone to the lowest level, period. Yeah. That's it. And so, children have different levels and of ability. They have different skills, and you cannot make an equitable education without forcing everyone into a groupthink box and bringing them all down to the lowest level. So it's really horrible, honestly.
And I recommend anyone listening to go look up the Fetzer Institute, because they quite literally the ones that created social emotional learning. And you could see the people that were involved, the things they were saying, and the people that they follow in the Fetzer Institute, especially, I believe his name is John Fetzer, the one that founded it. The guy was quite literally a mystic. He was a wizard. He believed in, he was a Gnostic. He believed in cult stuff. What was it? And not Angela, what's her name? Blavatsky or something, or Blavatsky, yeah. German, so, all theosophy. That's what it is.
Yeah. And so just Castle and social emotional learning, they were formed. They were put together at the Fetzer Institute. And just a little background on that, since you brought it up, is John Fetzer. He was a huge follower of Alice Bailey, who is known as the mother of the New Age spirituality. Mm-hmm. They believe that you can be your own God on earth. They did a lot of occult type things, seances and things like that. And she was also the publisher of the Lucifer Publishing, or the person that created the Lucifer Publishing Company. They ended up changing it to the Lucis Trust, which is now housed at the United Nations. And so his entire inspiration for the Fetzer Institute, John Fetzer was a very wealthy man, and he put all of his wealth into the Fetzer Institute to carry out Alice Bailey's mission of a one world global education and new spirituality. Yeah,
and she has a book on education that you can actually find online. Dave, talk about something. I'm gonna find this real quick. Oh, I found it. Education in the New Age. Alice A. Bailey. You can actually find it online. It is fully online to read. Education in the New Age, and that's where a lot of the influences for what we're talking about today came directly from Alice Bailey in that book. So go look it up. You can Google it. Do it before Google takes it off. They're going to listen to this. But anyway, so how are we getting this out of our schools? Is it doing what we're doing here and trying to raise the alarm for more people, or is there more that can be done?
Sure. So, we have to continue this education for people because they hear it once. It's a complicated system. So we just have to keep beating that drum. But there are also places, not all schools are allowing this, and it depends on your state mandates, that parents can opt out of parts of this, maybe specifically the social emotional learning lessons. Some schools are allowing that. They're offering alternatives. However, if you are able to do that, I want you to realize you are not removing your child completely from the influence of social emotional learning, because it was an entire systemic culture shift. Yeah. And so we have to educate everyone in there, get to the school boards. 5 years ago, nobody knew who was running for school board, right? It was not a thing. And for a long time, parents have kind of dropped the ball. And so we're trying to pick it back up. And if you're looking for one office that is extremely important to pay attention to, it is the school board. And get in there and talk to your legislators, right? At state level, at federal level. And we just have to continue to push this. Now, social emotional learning, because of the way it operates, brings in the critical race theory into the schools. It also brings in the gender ideology. It is the reason that we have teachers as activists. We have pornographic books that are flooding the system because, right, you have to represent everybody under equity. And so, but all over the country, I have a consulting business. This is what I do. And I work with people everywhere that they are able to start rooting some of this out, but they have to understand it first. And it's not, this is going to be a marathon. This is not a sprint, because it is really embedded into the system. But when you understand it, that's very helpful, because if you get on social media today, there's no shortage of, a rogue teacher that's being exposed, a lesson that just blows everyone away, or, a new policy. But we will just continue to play whack-a-mole for the rest of our lives if we don't root out the system. And that's what I'm trying to help people do, is understand the system that has to be taken out.
Yeah, we had Eyes Inside the Classroom on this show. A fantastic job done there. Libs of TikTok does a great job exposing all this stuff. And yeah, you're right. It is an uphill battle, and it is difficult unless you do delve into it. You talked about, the other theories that come in. They're all critical theories. They're all meant to come from that landscape. And if you start talking about it and then start talking about the branches of neo-Marxism that it came from, and the moment you say Marxism, people kind of look at you funny, because no one wants to hear that stuff as Marxist. But it really is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a new wave of Marxism coming in more of the Chinese sense, in the Cultural Revolution sense. So one of the things that you mentioned was you were talking about counselors and things like that. You mentioned them. What role do school counselors play in all this? And should they play a role in the education of kids?
So the school counselors, many people still don't realize what a massive driver they are of this agenda in the schools. Just a little background on the school counseling in America in public education is in 2014, Michelle Obama's Reach Higher First Lady initiative. One of the parts that she went after was the school counseling, which aligned also with the Common Core and the SEL that they were bringing in. Whereas when we were in school, you remember a school counselor as a guidance counselor, and their job was reactive. Okay, so they would respond to situations, usually just scheduling, right? Your schedule. I couldn't even tell you the names of my guidance counselors. Honestly, you don't see them very much.
And like being a little boy, if you got into a fight, maybe they take you to the guidance counselor after the principal, and the guidance counselor would help you guys work it out. And that was kind of their role.
That's exactly right. Exactly. And so when they changed it under the Reach Higher initiative, they decided that the school counselors were going to be proactive. They don't want you to call them guidance counselors anymore. They are school counselors, because social emotional learning is a trauma-informed practice. And so, and when we talk about trauma, a lot of people understand what trauma means for a child if they're, sexually abused or, seriously neglected. But they have now put in that category that everyone is a victim of trauma because you are all a victim of the racist America that we live in. So, but because of that shift in the way that they looked at it, the school counselors then were responsible for servicing every child in the school. A lot of parents don't realize if your child is in a public school, they are now in a tier 1 of a multi-tiered system of supports that we used to reserve for students that specifically needed it as a reactive service. Now they are all in tier 1 system of supports, and the guidance counselors have to service them. The guidance counselors under the Reach Higher initiative became, literally, this is their language, agents of social change. And so
activists.
That's exactly what they are. That's exactly what they are. They are activists. And one thing that we're seeing right now with the school counselors that is very alarming to people is all across the country, we are getting reports from parents that say, my child was serviced by the school counselor, allowed to assume a new identity at school. And the school counselor, the parents have no idea. And this is true. This is happening everywhere. This is allowed to happen in most states. I think Virginia is working on some bills right now to try to counter that. But what they do is they hide behind client confidentiality. So, how we were talking about language deception earlier,
David's losing it.
It's so crazy. I know. I mean, I know it is. But they have redefined what it means to be safe or abused. And so again, most people understand that as far as a child, are they safe? Are they abused? What those mean. But if a child goes through this, school and they're heavily influenced with the gender ideology, and then they are serviced by the school counselor, and a girl goes to that counselor and says, I feel like I'm a boy, but my parents don't understand. The counselors then will automatically deem the parents as the one that is putting their child at risk for suicide. And under client confidentiality, then they allow the child to assume a new identity, including name. They have transition closets at the schools where the kids can go and change clothes.
Transition closet.
And they will have meetings with all of the teachers and say, when you speak to the parents, use the legal name of the child, but at school, this child will be going by this from now on. And this is happening everywhere. And so, but they also are responsible for shifting the culture of the school. So they are huge drivers of this. If you go to the American School Counseling Association, for anybody that wants an idea of what their mission and their position statements are, I highly recommend going there, pulling up their position statements. And it is so politically biased and radical that the positions that they are supposed to take with children. The entire system, honestly, is a violation of our Constitution, but it is so difficult for people to really kind of weed it out. And that's what we're trying to get people to understand what is going on.
So if we don't combat this quickly, how long until teachers get these types of immunities? Because we talked about Alice Bailey, also Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed. They both kind of talk about how social work and education need to start walking hand in hand, and they need to be more simpatico. And right now you have, you're saying the school counselors can hide behind client-patient confidentiality. We already have teachers as mandated reporters for things like abuse. How long until they kind of get that type of immunity where, if we're talking about trauma, abuse is a type of trauma? If they're mandated reporters on abuse, why wouldn't they be considered, a special category if a kid feels like they have violence against them because, they don't know what gender they are, and they fear of their parents not accepting them, and their words are violent. Like, do you see that potentially going down that road where all teachers will eventually have that type of immunity in this system?
So the teachers have some protection from that, but that's why they're flooding the system right now with more school counselors, because they get that protection under that. Now, another thing that's happening is this counseling initiative has been going on for a few years. But if you look at your local school district, there is massive amounts of grant money being pumped into the schools to now bring in social workers. And when you hear that, that is CPS. Because you go through the school, you go through the classroom, you get all of this influence. You are taught through this Marxist ideology lens. You are influenced by the culture of the school. Then you go to the school counselors that's really the first step. And then once those school counselors identify a child as a possible victim of their parent who doesn't believe they're another gender, right? Because that now the parent's the abusive one. Now they're bringing in social workers, which is CPS, which will legally step in between the children and the parents.
And, we keep on saying Marxist, and I could see people scratching their heads right now going, well, how is any of this Marxist? They don't see it. And what people need to understand is this is I don't want to say perversion because Karl Marx sucked, but it kind of is a different way and a perversion of it, because when you're looking at it, it's all the conflict theory, right? It's where you find the conflict theory, okay, where you have a transgender student versus people wanting them to be cisgender and society. There's your conflict. That's a dialectic. Synthesis comes out to be, the social emotional learning equity aspect, social workers working with them. And then it continues. The conflict continues. Social workers continue to create more confusion amongst kids, especially when they start to get in the middle school, high school level, going through puberty. Already confused as hell, don't know anything about emotions. A pimple ruins their whole week, but they can decide their gender. So if you want it, so when we're talking about this stuff being Marxist, just remember that it takes the general dialectic Marxism. It's the conflict theory of Marxism.
Yeah, and I do want to say real quick, and maybe just because I listened to one of the more recent new discourses, Gnosticism and Modern West.
Yes.
But it makes so much more sense now in the fact that, when you come from, I'm paraphrasing it horribly, by the way, but I would listen to the pod. I would say, listen, it's 2 hours, 3 hours long, so it's hard. But to paraphrase it, and the belief system is basically like you were put on this planet and you were chained here. So it makes so much more sense that if you are supposed to be liberated from whatever chain you were, whatever chains you were put on Earth, it makes so much more sense that they believe that they are liberating people by bringing all these critical theories to them so they can open up and see, oh, wait, I'm not actually, they're conscious. Oh, I'm not what I am. I am what I'm feeding into and what I could become. And whether it's becoming another sex or just becoming consistently victimized in every single way, it's a weird way that they look at the world, but you could see it more once you realize the way that they're looking at it and why they're putting this into everyone's thoughts, because they think that this consciousness is actually bringing them to like a bigger man, like a godlier man. I don't know. I'm sorry. It's all garbled up in my head now.
But it makes sense.
You're right. So even in the documentation, especially at the Fetzer Institute level, they talk about a new consciousness.
Yes.
Is what they're creating. And so what's happening in the schools as far as the administration goes and teachers, the counselors, they are creating an emotional bond with your child that is inappropriate. And what they're, like you said, children, adolescents, you're going hormones, everything, right? I mean, there's just so much. And if you grew up and you never had a conflict with your parent, I mean, that's pretty amazing, because I did not grow up that way, right? I mean, you always, especially as you grow and you develop and you're trying to make your own way, but you're still a child with parents. So they're stepping in between that. And what they're saying, and you see this language everywhere, safe and welcoming. We are your family now. We are the safe place. And so that creates this emotional bond for children, because basically what they've done in school is there is no objective truth anymore. So the kids can come to school and believe, and still you get to go and still play like you're a toddler, make believe, princess or dragon in your house. Well, they're creating this culture in the schools, and they're saying, if your parents don't understand you, we do. And so we're the ones that are here for you. They're creating, friendships. There's no authority there anymore. And so, like you said, Paulo Freire, they see the relationship between the teachers and the students, or the counselors and the students, as equal, and not as there's authoritarian,
teacher, student, teacher.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And so a lot of parents don't realize this emotional bond as it's being built. They don't see it in the beginning. And then all of a sudden their child comes home, angry at their parents, and I'm another gender, or you don't understand me. Right. And now they can go to the counselors and they have an emotional support system, and it divides the children from the parents. And every Marxist revolution throughout time had to separate children from their parents.
Yep.
So if you want it in a nutshell, that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly is. So let's go back to the school counselors real quick. Do you think that they have any place in schools anymore? That, or should it be more of, because, when you talk about social emotional learning, it has been used in a private practice setting fairly successfully with youth that were struggling, that were feeling these types of issues in school, but it was outside of the school setting. There wasn't a counselor in the school doing it. They were getting professional help outside of the school setting to kind of get through whatever social or emotional trauma was harming their way of learning. And then they were put back into the school setting, away from, it wasn't happening in the schools. Do you think that we should now be looking to also force out school counselors, or really get their kind of role back into being just guidance again?
At this point, honestly, as corrupted as it is, I believe it has to be out of the schools. I'm sure someone could create some type of program that could help students, right, pick classes, and that could all be done through some type of, technology now. And so, but you nailed it. So children that need specific help for certain trauma that they have, real trauma they have experienced.
Yeah.
You take a child to get those services, but it's based on their specific needs and circumstances. They have taken that and applied it universally as a whole to everyone. That is where the danger falls. And if you're a parent and you're taking your child for some services like this, you're going to look into who's going to service your child, right? Yeah. And you get to choose that. That's right.
Essentially, they're treating everyone like they have an IEP. Like, honestly, like everyone has an IEP and they're disturbed some way and they need it. And it's interesting you mentioned the family aspect, because Little Miss Hot Mess and Drag Queen Pedagogy mentioned in that, and I'm not even kidding, this writer's name was Little Miss Hot Mess.
I know.
And they wrote a paper called Drag Queen Pedagogy. And one of the things that they talk about is joining into their family. And this is why they push into a lot of the queer theory with a lot of this stuff, because queer theory doesn't really mean a damn thing. It is universal. Queer can be whatever the hell they want it to be. It just has to mean different. It's not the norm. So that's why they're pushing into this. And you mentioned the family, and they're trying to push everyone away to find a new family away from the nuclear one. The parents are evil. The parents are bad.
It's cult. It's a cult.
It is
what
a
it
cult.
is.
Yeah,
they're recruiting them. If you pull up the specific steps that are out there, there's like 8 steps of cults, and they nail every single one of them. It's what they're doing.
Yeah, and one of the ways that they're doing it is, and I mentioned this to people before, and they're shocked. Any parents that are listening here that have school-age children, ask them if they started taking a lot more surveys. Random surveys at class. Ask them if they just take, surveys that seem benign with questions like, oh, have you ever gone here? Have you ever done these things? What typically happens with your family when this occurs? Typically benign questions that kids wouldn't see anything of. But really, one of the things that social emotional learning does is it loves to know everything about your kids, about your parents, and about your lifestyle and what you believe. How do you feel about what's known now and what has been known as a practice of data mining, and how it's going on in our school systems?
I think the data mining is probably the one issue I've been able to get people on whatever side of the aisle, if they will, open with an open mind to me to explain what it is. When they understand it, most people say absolutely not. Yeah. And so social emotional learning is collecting massive amounts of data on children. And the SEL surveys specifically, if you see these surveys, they seem very innocuous, and they do not seem like a big deal. They say they're going to check on the climate of the school. They just want to check on, everybody's well-being. So let me give you an example of why this is so dangerous. This is a real question from one of the SEL surveys. And it says, how confident are you that you can complete your work on a weekly basis? That doesn't really seem like a big deal, right? Most people would think, okay. But as a teacher, I would if I had 25% of that number come back and say 25% of your students don't feel like they can complete their work, I would think, okay, well, I need to reach them better. Maybe they need some extra instruction. Maybe they're just being lazy and I need to get on them a little bit, right? But they interpret all of the data that is collected through the equity lens. And when they interpret through an equity lens, they will interpret that question for 25% of them that say, I'm not confident I can complete my work. Well, that must mean that it's because the school is oppressive and they are not represented. And we need more LGBTQ flags and BLM flags and more clubs. And the teachers, maybe they need more DIE, diversity, inclusion, equity, call it DIE, because everything.
DIE, it is DIE. In this show, it is DIE as well. We are right there with you.
All right. So, So maybe the teachers need more of that training. We need to they don't understand. And that is how they would interpret a question about being confident in completing your work. So whatever the surveys say, it really doesn't matter. People want to get a hold of these surveys. I have several copies of different ones, but it doesn't matter. Whatever data, whatever results they want, they will get because they interpret it in a way to get those results. Now, what's extremely concerning about this data is they use it. This is their justification constantly for bringing in more books, like I said, more clubs, more training, more radical ideology, more representation. But not only that, each child has an SEL score. What they're doing with these surveys is they are profiling their personality traits. And every student has a score, and these scores follow them. Even if you remove them from school to school, it follows them. They are put into statewide longitudinal data systems and kept by our government and then each year or months when they get these scores, their goal is to try to get that child to raise their score. Well, how does that child raise their score? They have to become more woke. They have to align with more of this.
Is there a way anyone can try and access these scores from their government? Can a parent find out what their child is SEL score? Is this free information?
So it's not out there. Now there will be scores specifically like for the school district and things like that. But for your specific child, you would have to file some documentation with your school.
Crazy, which is insane. That's my freaking kid.
Yeah. So if people that are listening to this is the first time you've heard any of this, if you take anything away from what I have said, please opt your children out of the data. We need a massive movement across this country of opting the children out of the data. There is zero reason to allow the government to collect this information on your child because these databases are what's called P-20W. Preschool through workforce. They are creating a social credit score for these children that they will then use to feed into the workforce. And basically, they're deciding what personalities there are and who can do what. Eventually, that's what they're doing.
So how much would just doing that derail a lot of their plans? How much would just saying, hey, we have now 40, 50, 60% of the school saying, no, we're not playing your data games. Our kids aren't doing it. How much would that have an effect? Because I know a lot of parents, either they're too damn busy to go to board meetings or they are scared to go to board meetings because, one thing about people that, and this is considered a right wing thing that we're doing right now, even though it's just fighting for our kids. But a lot of people are scared of being labeled the right wing extremist or, we had a Moms for Liberty candidate at my school board elections, this past election cycle, and it got heavy and all the stuff was thrown around and people were afraid to be affiliated with the Moms for Liberty because, they were a bunch of white supremacist women, they were Nazis and all this stuff. So would this, if a parent of a school age kid could just do this and then talk to more parents about doing this exact thing, how much impact could they do kind of behind the scenes with this?
If we could get a massive amount of people to do this, it would throw a massive wrench in this because look, they do not care about teaching your children empathy other than to teach them empathy towards their beliefs. Okay. They don't care. They're after the data because this data they're going to control the lives of children as they become adults with this data. And so that's what they're after. So when you see these massive amounts, some of them are from the federal government, some of them are not, of grant money, often those grants come into the schools. And when they sign on the dotted line, part of what happens is they get to then collect that data. so they can target areas that they want. They can, go into certain demographics and push certain products. I mean, they are after the data. And so it would be a huge wrench. And that's why I push that as much as possible. And anybody can do it. Now, I just have to say this for anybody that is out there, and I understand it. I've went through a lot of stuff to get where I'm at, but if you are afraid to speak up for your child, if we don't stand right now, our children are going to live on their knees. And that is the truth. So if you think that, I don't know, I'm afraid to speak out, I'm afraid what people might think, I don't even know if we can really imagine what life will be like in 20 years for these children. Mm-hmm. So stand up for your children. You've got to.
And I'm going to say this. I'm sorry if it gets you flooded at all, Jennifer, but Jennifer was extremely easy to access. She answered, I messaged her on Twitter and she answered me right there pretty quickly. She's a great resource. She can connect you to Moms for Liberty if you need help, if you need strength, if you need people, if you need to know where a chapter is around you or things like that. Jennifer can be a resource for you there because she does go around nationally. She does speak about these things. This is important to her. So if you are nervous about what you could do, how you could do it, ways you want to go about it, consult Jennifer. Maybe she can help you reach out to a local Moms for Liberty chapter. Maybe you can start one up wherever you are and get that strength in numbers there. But she is a great and easy resource. And if you can't tell, passionate, but also pretty damn friendly as well.
Thank you. If I could just add, I have a website, jennifermcwilliamsconsulting.com, and I offer consulting, not just for Moms for Liberty groups, for anybody. I've worked with law firms. I've worked with legislators. I do travel and I speak, but I also I offer Zoom training sessions. So you can find all that information on my website. And I'd really appreciate, anybody reaching out if you're interested.
Yeah. So Dave, do you have anything else?
Well, anytime we have people that are very knowledgeable on education and things going on in classrooms, I feel like I know a decent amount. I think that can be shown a little bit, but there's always more to learn. And the more stuff that I learn, just the worse it gets. But also it's just man, I really have to do a lot. Even though I don't have a kid, obviously it doesn't mean anything. It still affects kids and kids in the future. So it's just wild to me to listen to all this stuff and realize all the work that has to be done.
You're a young guy, so even if you don't have children,
yes.
One day when you get older, you made me a doctor. These are our doctors. These are our attorneys.
Exactly.
These are the people that are going to run this country.
Yes.
It matters to everybody.
Yeah, the doctor's going to look at me and say, Pigment's a little bit too shy. I'm not going to be able to operate on him. I have to operate on someone else.
Yeah, medical Lysenkoism, right? That's coming, but it's here actually. But so, and also, Jennifer, just, like David said, learning more about this stuff, it can put you in a pretty dark place. What has that roller coaster been like for you when you dive into more research, when you look at Fetzer, when you look at Alice Bailey, when you look at all the things that really, and the fact that Alice Bailey's religion is housed in the UN and all UN books that are published are from the Lucis Trust, which people go read more about Alice Bailey and then find out why that is insane. What has it been like for you doing this research and then kind of just seeing how, I think a lot of teachers are kind of naive to it. They go through the schools of education in colleges where Freire has a major influence and we are being taught Freire's generative themes, and that's the way we're supposed to teach in our schools. But, what has it been like for you as you're sitting there and looking and saying I think all people, before they do this, start off going no, this can't be that bad. And then you read it and you're like, this is nefarious and the people that know are evil. How has it been for you doing that?
Mm-hmm. So, as we said earlier, I've been doing this for 4 years. I was actually a teacher in 2019 that spoke out against what was happening when I realized nothing like what I know now, but I realized it was very wrong what was happening. And I spoke out. My administration fired me for doing that, for my teaching position. So I, have went on and dug into it very deep. And it is very overwhelming at times. So if anybody is feeling that, I understand that many people in our space understand that are fighting this, but I look at my own children and I know that I will die on this hill, because this is for literally our country and for our children. And so I just, every day, if you step back and look at it in the big picture, it can be overwhelming. But I want to give people just a little bit of hope. When I started speaking out on this in 2019, quite literally, most everybody thought I was insane. They had never heard of social emotional learning. And I have just fought my way to keep talking about it. And today you can hardly pull up social media without people exposing some of this. So it is moving. It's a big move that we have to do, but it has came a long way. So if you're just now stepping into this, just understand, just 4 years ago, nobody knew anything about it.
Yeah. And if you are just now stepping into this, definitely, follow Jennifer on social media. She talks about it often. And, David and I have recommended it. We'll continue to recommend New Discourses, James Lindsay. It is a collegiate level classroom podcast. When you listen to James, if you dive in now, you're going to have no idea what the hell he's talking about. It's a marathon. I recommend going back to the beginning. But again, there's a lot of good people. There's Christopher Rufo. There's a lot of good people on these types of subjects that you should definitely dive in. It's a battle worth fighting. And, kind of last question for you here. How many administrators and school board members do you think actually understand what they are doing to kids? Do you think that they just hear the language? They think it's flowery. It sounds great. I don't want to go against the grain. These people are telling me to do this. Or do you think that there's a good handful of them that, a lot of them were educators. A lot of them went through the schools of education. Do you think that they understand what they're doing to kids and how nefarious it is? Or are they as naive as some of the teachers out there?
So a lot of them, I would say, are very naive. But at this point, if you have a position with a school board, I'm about to the point where I'm not giving a pass anymore. Because if your position is on the school board and that there's a major problem in education, you need to start doing some research and understanding both sides and what is going on. And as far as the schools go, one problem that we have is a lot of the younger teachers have went through this complete indoctrination of the universities. And so you have the activists, you have people that are naive. You also have teachers on there that don't believe this is good, but they're afraid to lose their jobs, which I can understand. Certainly. And so that's why the communities just have to coalesce together and really make a stand against this.
Yeah. So Jennifer, this was fantastic. This was an enlightening podcast, very educational. I think we said in the beginning, I think this was an extremely important show that we did. And I stand by that. I think, there's a lot of information here. We threw a lot of names at people. If you want any more information about anyone we talked about, contact David, myself, Jennifer. We can all point you in the right direction in terms of books and things to read. If you want to dive down this rabbit hole, it's a dark one, but join us because there'll be light at the end when we win. So that's something that you certainly need to do. Dave, anything else before we sign off?
Well, yeah, no, I just like how we basically closed out the show kind of 5 times, but then kept asking questions because it's just
you got a wealth of knowledge right there.
Yeah,
why wouldn't we use it? But again, she's Jennifer McWilliams, parental rights consultant, a great resource combating SEL all across the nation. Give her support if you can. And everybody, we will be back next week. Like, share, follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars. Find us on the social, spread this word of mouth. So long, everybody.